The Eastern Front of World War II's European theater would see some of the fiercest fighting in World War II and come to be known as Hitler's greatest mistake. The battles of the Eastern Front occurred from 1941 through 1945 and began after Hitler broke the non aggression pact that he had signed with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Through the battles of the Eastern Front, both Germany and the Soviet Union would encounter significant losses in terms of men and war materials, and it would ultimately begin the downfall of the Nazi army and the end of World War II's European theater. The battles on the Eastern Front can trace their beginnings back to the 1939 Non Aggression Pact signed between Germany and the Soviet Union. In that agreement, Hitler and Stalin decided to peacefully divide the nation of Poland between their two countries. Under the agreement, Germany would get control of Western Poland, designated by the dark brown section of the map, while the Soviet Union would get control of Eastern Poland and the territories of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in northeastern Europe. Under the agreement, Hitler and Stalin also pledged not to attack one another during the events of World War II. This agreement allowed Hitler to avoid fighting a two-front war against the Allied powers and allowed him to successfully launch his 1939 and 1940 Blitzkrieg attacks throughout France and England. As Hitler had more and more success with his Blitzkrieg attacks, he began to reconsider the agreement he had made with Stalin as he came to see the Soviet Union and its political ideas of communism as a threat to the new German Empire and the territories that Germany had claimed in Eastern Europe. As a result of his fear of the Soviet Union and communism, Hitler decided to launch Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941. Hitler would break the non-aggression pact by launching a surprise invasion of Russia's western territories. Hitler hoped that he would be able to acquire land in the Soviet Union that had valuable war and natural resources, including the territory of Ukraine and the Caucasus Mountains, and also hoped that defeating the Soviet Union would lead to the elimination of the threat of communism. Operation Barbarossa would last roughly 6 months from June 22nd through December 1941 and would see two major conflicts as the German army expanded its territory to include much of the Western Soviet Union. The first major conflict in Operation Barbarossa was the siege of the Soviet city of Leningrad, which occurred from August 8th through September 22nd, 1941. Leningrad was an important port city in northwestern Russia, and during the fighting at the siege of Leningrad, roughly 900,000 Russian civilians would die as a result of the heavy bombing and the starvation and exposure to the elements that occurred after the German siege and destruction of Leningrad. Following the success of the invasion of Leningrad, Hitler turned his sights towards another major city in Russia, the city of Moscow, where he began the Battle of Moscow in September 1941. This battle would last for approximately 5 months, from September 30th through January 7th of 1942. And in this battle, Germany would advance to within 15 miles of the city of Moscow, coming dangerously close to invading and occupying Russia's Moscow. German forces were ultimately stopped by fierce Russian resistance in Moscow and as a result of the harsh winter weather conditions in the Soviet Union, which the German army was not prepared for. Hitler's failure to invade and conquer Moscow allowed the Soviet Union to begin to prepare a counterattack and set up defenses in other important territories throughout the Western Soviet Union. As you can see from the map on this slide, Operation Barbarossa was a multi-pronged attack launched from the German territories of East Prussia, Poland, and then from the German allies of Hungary and Romania. While the North and Central German forces launched their attacks on Leningrad and Moscow, Germany's southern divisions and troops from their allied countries, Hungary and Romania, launched the attack on the city of Stalingrad. Hitler's failure at the Battle of Moscow and his inability to wage successful warfare during the Russian winter allowed the Soviet Union to set up its resistance forces and begin pushing back on the German advance into Russia. The first major battle of the Soviet resistance was the Battle of Stalingrad, which became the major turning point on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Stalingrad would last from July 17, 1942 through February 2, 1943. In this battle, Hitler hoped to again use his successful blitzkrieg strategy to complete the conquest that he had failed with Moscow in 1941. Hitler believed that if he was able to successfully overrun and take control of the city of Stalingrad, which had been named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, it would demoralize the Russian population and soldiers and lead to a Soviet surrender. Many of Hitler's top generals advised Hitler against launching the Battle of Stalingrad. However, Hitler disregarded their warnings and launched the battle anyway. As the Battle of Stalingrad unfolded, German soldiers encountered fierce Russian resistance by both soldiers and civilians in the city of Stalingrad. Guerrilla attacks launched by Russian citizens and soldiers who were concealed within the buildings and homes of the city led to some of the deadliest battles on the Eastern Front. Over the course of the Battle of Stalingrad, Germany's soldiers became engaged in a stalemate in which they were unable to conquer the city, and the battle dragged out into the Russian winter of 1942 and 1943. Germany's soldiers were again unprepared for fighting during the winter months in Russia, and Germany ultimately lost the Battle of Stalingrad and suffered significant casualties over the 6 months of the battle. In total, Germany had over 800,000 casualties, with roughly 300,000 soldiers being killed, while the Russians suffered significantly more casualties, totaling 1.1 million. The Germans were unable to conduct the battle and resupply their soldiers, and were ultimately forced to surrender on January 31st, 1943, when only 90,000 German survivors were available to continue fighting the war. This surrender became the first instance of World War II where a German army unit surrendered to the Allied powers. Following the successful defense of Stalingrad, Russia went on the offensive and began to try and push German troops further out of the Soviet Union and invade German-occupied territory in Eastern Europe. This led to the second major battle and turning point of the Eastern Front, the Battle of Kursk, which happened from July 5th to August 23rd, 1943. During this battle, Germany failed to stop the first major Russian advance towards Germany and suffered significant tank and aircraft losses, which crippled their ability to continue the blitzkrieg strategy on the Eastern Front. From the end of the Battle of Kursk on, Russia would be on the offensive in the Eastern Front, and Germany would be on the defensive, trying to stop the Russian soldiers from advancing into German territories. As Soviet troops advanced towards Germany, 3 more important battles occurred on the Eastern Front. The first of these battles was Operation Tempest, which was actually launched as a resistance movement by the Polish Home Army, which began a series of uprisings in the German-occupied territories of Poland. These uprisings would last for almost a full year from January 1944 through 1945 and would divert resources away from Germany's efforts to stop the Russian advance. In addition to Operation Tempest, Russia also launched Operation Bagraton from June 22nd through August 19th, 1944. This battle allowed Russian and Polish soldiers to liberate the Eastern European country of Belarus and retake the Soviet portion of Poland, which had been invaded and occupied by Germany during Operation Barbarossa. The final major battle of the Soviet advance on Germany was the East Prussia Offensive, which began in early 1945 and became the final battle of the Eastern Front of World War II. In the Prussia Offensive, German troops were pushed all the way back from the eastmost line in the beginning of 1944, all the way back through Prussia, through Poland, into the border of Germany, its original territory. This series of events led to the Russian Red Army engaging in a race with the British and U.S. forces who had invaded during the D-Day invasion of 1944, with both sides hoping to push the Germans back to the city of Berlin and force a surrender. Germany would ultimately surrender, ending the war in the European theater on May 9, 1945. The combination of Germany's failures on the Eastern Front and the increased pressure from the D-Day invasion and the Allied forces on the Western Front ultimately defeated the German army and forced them into surrender.